Lyra stepped off the sleek, silver spacecraft, her feet touching the unfamiliar Earth ground. She had traveled far across the stars to this strange new world, but the vastness of it made her feel smaller than ever. At just 4 feet tall, Lyra was considered petite even by the standards of her own people, the Zilari. Her species was known for its sharp intellect, agility, and the ability to communicate with others in ways that transcended spoken language. However, to the humans she met, Lyra seemed almost fragile, a tiny figure among towering giants. Her mission was clear. She was part of a diplomatic exchange to foster understanding between Earth's inhabitants and the peaceful Zilari. As the first Zilari representative to set foot on Earth, Lyra felt an enormous weight on her tiny shoulders. But the more she looked around, the more overwhelmed she became. Humans were so much bigger than her. They had strong, broad shoulders, towering figures that often looked down at her with curious or even confused expressions. Despite her advanced knowledge and technology, she couldn't shake the feeling that her smallness made her invisible. Lyra wasn't sure what she had expected, but it wasn't this. She thought the humans would welcome her with open arms, seeing her as a symbol of peace and cooperation. Instead, she often found herself being ignored or dismissed. Her presence seemed to be little more than a passing curiosity for the Earthlings. At the diplomatic events, her voice was often drowned out by the loud speeches of other ambassadors. She was rarely the focus of attention, and when she did manage to speak, people's eyes would wander, or their attention would quickly shift to someone more imposing. It wasn't that Lyra wasn't intelligent or capable. She had studied Earth's history, its cultures, and its people for years before this mission. She knew how to solve problems, think critically, and even make people laugh. But it seemed that her small stature made her invisible to the very people she had come to work with. No matter how much she tried to make herself heard, no matter how often she tried to contribute, it felt like the humans looked right past her. In the evenings, when the crowds would gather for formal dinners or casual meetups, Lyra would often sit alone at a table, sipping her drink quietly. Her thoughts wandered to her home planet, the bustling cities filled with towering structures where her people never felt out of place. Back there, her size didn't matter. It was her mind, her skills, and her heart that counted. But here, on Earth, it seemed as if her small size was a constant obstacle, and it made her feel insignificant. Maybe I wasn't meant for this, Lyra thought to herself, staring out at the stars above the Earth's atmosphere. She had once believed that her journey to Earth would open doors to new friendships and understanding. But now she was unsure. She could see the curious stares of the humans around her, but she never felt that they truly saw her for who she was. It was as if her size had created a wall between them and her. As the days passed, Lyra began to withdraw further into herself. The sparkle of excitement that had once filled her eyes when she arrived was slowly fading. She spent more time in her room, reading or working on reports that no one seemed to care about. It was during one of these quiet moments that she began to question something she had never really thought about before. Was it possible that her size was something that could never be overlooked? Was she destined to always be the small alien, the one people didn't take seriously? In the midst of her doubts, she couldn't help but notice how people always seemed drawn to others who were bigger, louder, and more imposing. It seemed like every time there was a conversation, the larger beings were the ones who commanded attention, while she was left in the background, a mere observer. The more she thought about it, the more she believed it wasn't just her intelligence or abilities that made the difference, it was her size. Maybe I'm too small for this, she thought, her heart heavy with the weight of self-doubt. Just then, the door to her room opened, and a young human man entered. He was carrying a tablet and looked like he had come to check on her progress. His name was Jack, and like most of the humans she had met, he was tall and broad-shouldered. However, unlike the others, Jack didn't immediately look at her with curiosity or judgment. He smiled at her in a way that felt different. "Hey, how's it going?" Jack asked, his voice warm and friendly. Lyra blinked, taken off guard. No one had spoken to her like that before, so casually, as if she were just another person. She hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I'm fine," she said softly, still trying to compose herself. "Just thinking." Jack didn't press her. Instead, he sat down across from her and began to talk about his work and the latest developments in the human efforts to learn from the Zulari. As he spoke, Lyra began to feel something she hadn't felt in days: hope. Jack wasn't looking at her as if she were some tiny alien to be pitied. He was listening, truly listening, as if her thoughts mattered. For the first time, Lyra felt that someone on Earth could see beyond her size. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, there was hope for her here after all. The days that followed Lyra's first real conversation with Jack were a mix of hope and uncertainty. Although Jack seemed genuinely interested in her, the others still treated her as they always had, as a small curiosity. Lyra's time on Earth had already been difficult, and as much as she wanted to focus on her work and the diplomatic mission, the constant feeling of being overlooked made it hard to stay motivated. At the diplomatic events, the larger, more imposing aliens were always the center of attention. Lyra had no choice but to watch from the sidelines, silently taking notes or helping when needed, but never truly being seen. It wasn't that she didn't have anything valuable to offer. It was just that no one seemed to want to listen. Her voice, though intelligent and wise, was often drowned out by the boisterous, confident speeches of the bigger ambassadors. One evening, as Lyra sat alone at a large conference table, she overheard some of the humans talking. They were discussing the progress of the exchange program, and Lyra couldn't help but eavesdrop. One human, a tall woman with dark hair, spoke in a low voice to her colleague. "I still don't understand why they sent her. She's so small. I mean, she's cute, but how is she supposed to help with anything? We need someone more commanding." The words stung, and though they were spoken in a whisper, Lyra heard them clearly. She had tried her best to keep a positive attitude, but the constant reminder of her size was beginning to wear on her. How could she help bridge the gap between two species when she couldn't even be taken seriously? What was the point of being intelligent and capable if no one cared? As the night continued, Lyra felt smaller than ever. She could see the large, imposing aliens making their way across the room, their voices booming as they interacted with the humans. They seemed to command attention without even trying. Lyra, on the other hand, sat in the corner, unnoticed, like a shadow in the background. Even the humans she had tried to connect with seemed more interested in the taller, stronger figures. That evening, Lyra retreated to her room, feeling the weight of her loneliness. She had never been this isolated before. Back home, her people valued each other for their intellect, kindness, and ability to think creatively. It didn't matter how tall someone was or how physically strong they appeared. What mattered was the strength of their mind and the goodness of their heart. But here, on Earth, it was as if none of that mattered. The size of a person, or in Lyra's case, an alien, was the first thing everyone saw. It felt as though her mind, her heart, and her abilities were invisible to those around her. She spent the next few days lost in her thoughts, retreating further into herself. When Jack checked in on her again, he found her sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights below. "You okay?" Jack asked, his voice gentle. Lyra hesitated for a moment before turning to face him. "I don't think I'm cut out for this," she said quietly. "I try so hard, but no one sees me. I'm just too small." Jack didn't immediately respond. Instead, he walked over to her and sat beside her at the window. He didn't try to offer comforting words right away. Instead, he simply sat in silence, letting her process her feelings. After a while, he spoke. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. Lyra looked up at him, a little confused. "What?" "I see someone who doesn't give up. I see someone who has a lot to offer, even if others don't realize it yet," Jack said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You may be small, but that doesn't mean you're not important. It's your heart, your mind, that make you stand out. And if anyone doesn't see that, they're the ones who are missing out. Lyra was taken aback by his words. She hadn't expected him to say something so kind. It made her heart flutter a little, and for the first time in days, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe Jack was right. Maybe it wasn't about how tall she was or how much space she took up in a room. Maybe it was about something more important, something deeper that wasn't as easy to see. But even as she felt that spark of hope, the doubt still lingered in her mind. Was she truly important to anyone? Did her small size make her less worthy of attention, of respect? She had so many doubts, and even though Jack's words were kind, they didn't completely erase the hurt she felt from the other humans' indifference. As the days passed, the quiet moments with Jack continued. They spent time talking, sharing stories of their different worlds, and slowly, Lyra began to feel more at ease with him. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, but she still struggled with the feeling that no one else saw her the way Jack did. One afternoon, while Lyra was working on a report, Jack appeared at her door once more. He had a strange grin on his face, and he was holding a small gift wrapped in bright paper. "For you," he said, handing it to her. Lyra looked at the gift with curiosity. She opened it carefully, revealing a small pendant shaped like a star. "What is it?" she asked. "It's just a reminder," Jack said. "You're a star, Lyra. Don't forget that." For the first time in a long while, Lyra smiled. Jack's words were simple, but they meant more than she could express. Perhaps she wasn't as invisible as she had thought. Perhaps, just perhaps, there were people on Earth who could see her for who she truly was. Lyra couldn't quite believe it. The small star-shaped pendant that Jack had given her had become a symbol of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, just a small token, but to Lyra, it meant the world. Every time she looked at it, her heart warmed. The thought that someone saw her not for her size, but for her heart and abilities, was something she had never experienced before on Earth. As the days passed, Lyra began to change. She started walking with her head held a little higher, speaking with more confidence. She still faced moments of doubt, but they were fewer now. Jack's words echoed in her mind. "You're a star." Those words gave her strength to keep going, even when she felt small and overlooked by the world around her. At the next diplomatic event, Lyra decided she would try something different. Instead of quietly sitting in the background, waiting for someone to notice her, she would step forward. She didn't have to be loud or commanding. She just needed to speak from her heart. The event was held at a grand hall, filled with humans and aliens from various planets. The atmosphere was buzzing with excitement, and Lyra could already sense the usual unease creeping in. She had been to enough of these gatherings to know that the attention would go to the bigger, louder figures. But today, she wasn't going to wait for someone to see her. She would make them see her. Lyra walked into the room with a quiet resolve. She had a goal in mind, to speak up. As she moved through the crowd, her eyes met Jack's across the room. He gave her a small smile, and she couldn't help but smile back. His support was all she needed to take that first step. When the speeches began, Lyra waited patiently for her turn. As expected, the larger ambassadors went first, each one commanding attention with their booming voices and grand gestures. Lyra could feel the weight of their presence, but she didn't shrink away. She stood tall, or as tall as her petite frame would allow, waiting for her moment. Finally, it was her turn. As she stepped forward, the room fell silent. Lyra's heart raced. This was it, the moment where she would either prove to herself that she belonged here or let her fears take over. She cleared her throat, then spoke, her voice steady but not overpowering. "I know I may not seem like the typical representative," Lyra began. "I am small, yes, but that does not mean I am weak. In fact, my size has taught me something very important. It's not about how much space you take up in the world. It's about how you use the space you have to make a difference." The room was still. Lyra could feel the eyes of the humans and aliens on her. For a moment, she worried she had said too much or not enough. But then she took a deep breath and continued. I come from a world where every individual, no matter their size, is valued for their intellect, their creativity, and their kindness. I may not have the physical strength of others, but I am strong in other ways. My mind, my heart, and my ability to connect with others are my greatest strengths. Her voice, though quiet, held a power that surprised even her. She was speaking not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt small or overlooked. She spoke for those who didn't have the loudest voice or the biggest presence, but still had so much to offer. I believe that if we are to truly understand each other, we must look beyond the surface. Lyra finished. We must see the heart of a person, their intentions and their abilities, rather than just their outward appearance. There was a pause after she spoke, and for a brief moment, Lyra thought she might have made a mistake. But then, slowly, applause began. It started softly, with just a few claps here and there, but it grew louder as more people joined in. The humans, the aliens, even those who had once dismissed her, were clapping, recognizing her words and her courage. Lyra felt a wave of warmth rush over her. It wasn't about the applause. It was about the fact that, for the first time, she had been heard. She had stood in front of a room full of people, many of whom were far bigger than her, and spoken her truth, and they had listened. As she stepped back from the stage, Jack was there waiting for her. He had a proud smile on his face, and his eyes sparkled with admiration. You did it, Jack said, his voice full of pride. You were amazing. Lyra smiled, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. She had done it. She had stepped out of the shadows and found her voice. And in that moment, she realized something important. She didn't need to be tall or loud to make an impact. She just needed to be true to herself. As the event continued, Lyra felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. She wasn't invisible anymore. The humans, and even some of the aliens, were coming up to her, offering compliments and asking questions about her experiences. She found herself laughing and talking, no longer holding back because of her size. She had proven, not just to the others, but to herself, that her heart and mind were just as valuable as anyone else's. The evening ended with Lyra feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't known was possible. She had shown the world that being small didn't mean being weak, and that everyone, no matter their size, had something meaningful to offer. As she left the hall, she caught Jack's eye once more. He gave her a wink, and she knew, deep down, that she had found a true friend in him. And that, more than anything else, made her feel truly seen. The aftermath of Lyra's speech was nothing short of remarkable. Word spread quickly through the diplomatic circles about the petite ambassador who had delivered a heartfelt and inspiring message. People began to see Lyra in a new light, not just as the small alien with a quiet demeanor, but as someone who carried great wisdom and courage. Over the following weeks, Lyra noticed a shift in how others treated her. Fellow ambassadors, who once barely acknowledged her presence, now greeted her warmly. They asked for her input during meetings and genuinely seemed interested in what she had to say. Though she appreciated the newfound respect, Lyra remained humble, focusing on her mission to foster unity and understanding between the humans and her people. One day, during a particularly important conference, Lyra found herself seated next to a human scientist named Dr. Elena Reyes. Dr. Reyes was renowned for her work in environmental sustainability, and her passion for preserving ecosystems was evident in everything she did. Lyra had always admired people who dedicated themselves to protecting their worlds, and she was eager to learn more about the human perspective on such matters. "You've made quite an impression, Lyra," Dr. Reyes said with a kind smile as they exchanged greetings. "Your speech last month was, well, let's just say it was a wake-up call for many of us." Lyra felt her cheeks flush a light shade of violet, the color her species displayed when flustered. "Thank you, Dr. Reyes. I only spoke what I felt was true." "And that's exactly what we needed to hear," Dr. Reyes replied. But tell me, how does your planet approach environmental challenges? I've heard your people have a unique way of working with nature rather than against it. Lyra's eyes lit up at the opportunity to share her culture. Yes, on Aetheris, we believe in harmony with our environment. Our homes are built within the natural landscape, and we use energy derived from the planet's magnetic fields. Every decision we make considers the impact it will have on future generations. Dr. Reyes listened intently, nodding as Lyra spoke. That's fascinating. Perhaps we could collaborate on a project, something that combines the best of both our worlds. The idea excited Lyra. A joint project could not only strengthen the bond between their species, but also demonstrate how their differences could lead to innovative solutions. I would love that, Lyra said with a smile. Together, we could achieve something truly meaningful. The conference continued, with discussions ranging from trade agreements to technological exchanges. Lyra participated actively, offering insights and suggestions where she could. She was beginning to realize that her perspective, shaped by her unique experiences, was valuable. Later that evening, as the attendees gathered for a casual dinner, Lyra found herself seated next to Jack. His easygoing nature had always put her at ease, and she was grateful for his unwavering support. "You were amazing today," Jack said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. "I've never seen anyone command a room quite like you did during that session on resource sharing." Lyra laughed softly. "I'm not sure command is the right word, but I'm learning to speak up when it matters." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her with admiration. "You've come a long way since we first met. You're proving that strength comes in many forms, Lyra. I think a lot of people needed that reminder." As they continued their conversation, the topic shifted to the upcoming cultural exchange event. Each species would showcase their traditions, arts, and innovations to promote mutual understanding and appreciation. Lyra was both excited and nervous. She wanted to represent Aetheris well, but she also wanted to ensure the event fostered genuine connections. "I think you should lead the Aetherian presentation," Jack suggested. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? But surely there are others more qualified." "Lyra," Jack interrupted gently, "no one can represent the heart of your people better than you. You've already shown everyone the strength of your spirit. This is your chance to share the beauty of your culture too." Lyra considered his words, her fingers tracing the star pendant around her neck. He was right. She had come this far by believing in herself and embracing her unique qualities. Why stop now? The days leading up to the cultural exchange were a flurry of activity. Lyra worked tirelessly with her team to prepare a presentation that would highlight Aetheris' rich history, artistic achievements, and harmonious way of life. She designed interactive displays that allowed visitors to experience a glimpse of her world, from holographic gardens to recordings of the soothing melodies her people used to communicate with their planet's wildlife. When the day of the event arrived, the venue was bustling with excitement. Representatives from countless species had gathered, eager to share and learn. Lyra stood by her exhibit, her heart pounding with anticipation. This was her moment to show not just who she was, but what her people stood for. As the first visitors approached, Lyra greeted them warmly and began her presentation. Her voice, though soft, carried a quiet confidence that drew people in. She spoke of the Aetherians' deep connection to their environment, their values of empathy and cooperation, and their belief that every being, no matter their size or strength, had a role to play in the greater harmony of the universe. The audience was captivated, their eyes reflecting both wonder and respect. Lyra's small stature seemed insignificant compared to the vastness of her spirit and the richness of her culture. By the end of her presentation, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had not only represented her people with pride, but had also built bridges of understanding and friendship. That evening, as Lyra stood beneath the stars, she felt a profound sense of peace. She was no longer the small alien who doubted her place in the world. She was Lyra, a bridge between worlds, and her journey was just beginning. The success of the cultural exchange left Lyra with a sense of pride she had never felt before. But with it came greater responsibilities. The Etherian Council, impressed by her work, requested her to mediate an important negotiation between the humans and a coalition of neighboring species. The matter involved a shared space station that served as a vital hub for trade and research. Disputes over resource allocation had grown tense, and Lyra was tasked with finding a solution. Although honored, Lyra couldn't ignore the weight of the challenge. These negotiations were known to drag on for weeks, sometimes collapsing under the strain of stubbornness and misunderstandings. She felt the pressure of representing her people while ensuring fairness for all. Jack, as always, stood by her side. "You've got this, Lyra," he said with his usual confident grin. "You've proven yourself time and time again. Just remember, the key is to listen first, then speak." Lyra nodded, taking his advice to heart. The ability to listen deeply was something her people valued, and she intended to use it to her advantage. The first day of negotiations took place in a vast conference hall aboard the station. Delegates from 5 species, including humans, sat around a circular table, their faces serious. The atmosphere was heavy with tension as representatives voiced their demands and grievances. A hulking reptilian alien named Zathor, representing the Sauric Coalition, spoke with a booming voice. "Our mining operations near the station require additional energy. We have long contributed the most resources and deserve priority access to the station's power grid." A human delegate, a sharp-eyed woman named Commander Vega, responded firmly. "With all due respect, the station's energy must be distributed equally. Without fair access, our research efforts will stall, and the entire system will suffer." Lyra listened carefully, her gaze shifting between the speakers. She could see the frustration brewing on both sides, threatening to escalate. Drawing a deep breath, she raised her hand to speak. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice calm yet steady. "It's clear that each of you holds the station's well-being in high regard. Perhaps we can explore solutions that benefit everyone, rather than focusing on what divides us." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Encouraged by their attention, Lyra continued. "On my homeworld, we face similar challenges with limited resources. One approach that has worked for us is creating shared resource pools, where those with surpluses can temporarily support those in need, with the understanding that balance will be restored when possible." The idea sparked murmurs among the delegates. Zathor narrowed his eyes, considering her words. A shared pool. And who decides how much each contributes or receives? Lyra met his gaze without hesitation. It would require transparency and mutual trust. "I propose forming a joint oversight committee, with representatives from each species, to monitor and adjust allocations as needed." Commander Vega leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "That could work, provided the oversight is truly impartial." The discussions that followed were intense, but Lyra's calm demeanor and ability to reframe arguments helped diffuse rising tensions. She made sure every delegate felt heard, gently guiding the conversation toward common ground. As the hours stretched into days, progress became evident. The delegates began to acknowledge each other's needs and started working together to draft a compromise. Lyra's idea of a shared resource pool gained traction, with details being refined and agreed upon. One evening, after a particularly long session, Lyra found herself alone on a viewing deck, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space reminded her of how small she was in the grand scheme of things. Yet, despite her size, she had managed to influence events that could shape the future of interstellar cooperation. Jack joined her, carrying 2 mugs of a steaming human beverage he called hot chocolate. He handed her one and leaned against the railing beside her. "You're doing great, Lyra," he said, his tone soft. "I know this isn't easy, but you're making a real difference." Lyra took a sip of the rich, sweet drink and smiled. "It's not just me. Everyone is playing a part. I'm just trying to help them see the bigger picture." Jack chuckled, spoken like a true leader. The final day of negotiations arrived, and with it, a sense of cautious optimism. The delegates gathered to review the finalized agreement, which outlined the formation of the Joint Oversight Committee and the implementation of the shared resource pool. Lyra watched as the document was signed by each representative, a symbol of unity and progress. When it was her turn, she added her signature with a steady hand, her heart swelling with pride. As the session concluded, Zathar approached her, towering over her petite frame. "You are small, but your wisdom is immense," he said, his voice gruff yet respectful. "Thank you for guiding us through this." Lyra bowed her head slightly. The strength of a bridge lies not in its size, but in its ability to connect. The sentiment lingered in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. Lyra's role as a bridge between worlds had grown stronger, and the bonds she helped forge would ripple far beyond the walls of the space station. Lyra's success in the negotiations had made her a celebrated figure among the intergalactic community. But even with all the praise and attention, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the brink of something even more significant. The peace treaty she helped broker between the human and alien species had set a new tone for cooperation, and now new opportunities were opening up, some of them more challenging than she had ever imagined. One day, as Lyra stood in her quarters on the space station, she received an unexpected message from the Aetherian Council. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a familiar face. It was Counselor Orcs, one of the highest-ranking members of the Aetherian government. "Lyra," he greeted her, his tone serious. "We have a mission for you." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had been so focused on her duties as an ambassador that she hadn't expected to be called upon for a new assignment so soon. "What is it, Counselor?" she asked, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves. "There is a growing threat in the outer reaches of our galaxy," Orcs explained. "A group of rogue traders, operating beyond the established borders, have begun to disrupt trade routes and sow chaos. We need someone who can negotiate with them and bring them to the table before this escalates into full-scale conflict." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. A mission like this would be unlike any she had ever faced before. Rogue traders were known for their lawlessness, and negotiations with such factions could be dangerous, unpredictable, and in some cases, futile. But Lyra knew one thing for sure: if anyone could find a peaceful solution, it was her. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady. "When do I leave?" Orcs nodded approvingly. "Soon. The rogue traders have a base on a distant moon, near the edge of the known galaxy. We've arranged for a human ship to escort you there." Lyra's thoughts immediately turned to Jack. She had come to trust him deeply, not only as a friend but as someone who believed in her abilities. She was relieved to know that he would be there with her. The next day, Lyra boarded the human vessel, a sleek, advanced ship designed for long-distance travel. Jack was already waiting for her on the bridge. His expression was a mix of determination and concern. "Ready for another adventure?" Jack asked, his trademark smile reassuring her. "I suppose I don't have much of a choice," Lyra answered, her voice light despite the gravity of the situation. "But yes, I'm ready." The ship's engines hummed to life as they departed, leaving the space station behind. As they traveled through the vastness of space, Lyra found herself reflecting on how far she had come. From the shy, uncertain alien to the confident diplomat she had become, this journey had been one of growth, not just in her professional life, but in herself. Along the way, Jack and Lyra spent time discussing the mission, the possible challenges, and how they could approach the rogue traders. Jack had been through many tense situations as a soldier, and his insights were invaluable. Lyra appreciated his practical wisdom. "I've seen a lot of different species," Jack said as they sat in the ship's lounge, looking out at the stars. "But it's not often that I come across someone like you, Lyra. You're not just trying to make peace. You're building something that lasts." Lyra smiled softly, grateful for his support. "I just hope I can make a difference this time too." As the journey continued, Lyra began to feel a sense of quiet determination welling up within her. The rogue traders may have been ruthless, but she knew that negotiation, honesty, empathy, and respect for all involved was the way forward. They finally arrived at the rogue trader's base, a barren moon on the edge of the galaxy. The base was hidden deep within a rocky landscape, surrounded by makeshift structures and heavily armed guards. The moment the ship docked, Lyra's heart began to race. This was no diplomatic meeting in a controlled environment. This was a high-risk negotiation that could go wrong at any moment. As they disembarked, Jack turned to Lyra, his expression serious. "Stay close. This place isn't exactly friendly." Lyra nodded. She was small, and her species' physical abilities were not suited for combat, but her strength lay in her mind and her heart. She was determined to stay true to herself and her mission. Together, they made their way through the dark corridors of the rogue trader's base. The air was thick with tension, the walls adorned with makeshift weapons and displays of power. It was a far cry from the diplomatic halls Lyra was used to. But she didn't let the intimidating environment shake her resolve. Finally, they reached the inner chamber where the leader of the rogue traders awaited them, a tall, imposing figure named Dracos. His cold eyes studied them with disdain as they entered. "So the Aetherians send their little ambassador to negotiate with me." Dracos sneered. "I'm not impressed." Lyra stood tall, her voice steady. "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to make peace, if you're willing to listen." Dracos' gaze flickered with amusement, but he said nothing. Lyra took a deep breath, her heart steadying. This was the moment. She had done the hard work of building bridges before. Now, it was time to see if her methods could work with those who preferred destruction. Lyra stood face to face with Dracos, the leader of the rogue traders. The dim lighting in the room only highlighted the tension in the air. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. It was a test, not just of her skills as a negotiator, but of her belief in what she had always known, that peace was possible, even in the most difficult situations. Draco's eyes narrowed as he sized her up. His voice was cold, dismissive. "You must be crazy, coming here thinking you can negotiate with people like us. You don't know what you're dealing with." Lyra stood firm, her voice steady. "I may not know everything about you or your people, Dracos, but I know that no one is beyond redemption. And no matter how tough the situation, there is always a way forward. I'm here to find that path with you, if you'll let me." For a long moment, Dracos said nothing, his expression unreadable. The room felt silent, as if even the air itself was holding its breath. Jack, who stood just behind Lyra, had his hand on his sidearm, ready for anything. But he trusted Lyra's approach. He knew she wouldn't be swayed by intimidation. Dracos finally spoke, his voice low. "You're naive. You come from a world where diplomacy works, where people talk instead of fight. Here, it's survival of the fittest. People only listen when you show them power." Lyra's heart clenched, but she didn't let the emotion show. "Power isn't always the answer, Dracos. It's true that strength is needed in many situations, but real power comes from understanding, from making choices that benefit everyone. That's the kind of power I believe in." Dracos stared at her, his eyes flickering with something. Was it curiosity? Before he glanced at his followers, who stood around the room, watching the exchange closely. "We've been surviving out here for years, and we've learned not to trust anyone," Dracos said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "What makes you think we'll trust you?" Lyra took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Because I trust you," she said simply. "I'm not asking you to trust me immediately, but I'm asking for the chance to prove that we can make something better, something that doesn't rely on fear or violence." A long silence followed her words. For a moment, it felt like nothing would change. But then, to Lyra's surprise, Dracos slowly sat down, his sharp gaze still fixed on her. "Fine," he said, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "We'll listen, but if you fail, don't expect me to keep my promises." Lyra nodded, her heart beating fast. "I'm not asking for guarantees, Dracos. I'm asking for a chance." And with that, The conversation began. It wasn't easy. Dracos and his people were not interested in compromise, and it took all of Lyra's patience and wisdom to find common ground. They discussed trade routes, resources, and the need for stability in the galaxy. Each argument she made was met with resistance, but she never gave up. She kept listening, understanding their concerns, and offering solutions that would benefit everyone. Hours passed, and the atmosphere in the room slowly began to shift. Lyra could see the hardened faces of the rogue traders soften just a little. They weren't ready to completely trust her, but they were beginning to understand that there could be a different way to live, one where they didn't have to fight for everything they wanted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dracos stood up. His shoulders were stiff, but there was something new in his posture. He wasn't giving in, but he was considering the possibility of peace. "I'll agree to a temporary truce," he said, his voice begrudging but less cold. "We'll stop disrupting the trade routes for now, but we're not signing any official treaty. Not yet." Lyra's heart lifted. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step in the right direction. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance to prove that we can work together." As the meeting ended, Jack came over to Lyra. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also the quiet satisfaction of having made a difference. "You did it," Jack said, his voice full of admiration. "You found a way through." Lyra smiled tiredly. "It wasn't easy, but I believed in it, and so did you." As they walked back to the ship, the weight of the mission slowly began to lift from Lyra's shoulders. She had done it. She had started a new chapter, one that could lead to greater peace, not just with the rogue traders, but with others who might follow their example. And for the first time in a long while, Lyra allowed herself to believe that the galaxy, so vast and full of different species, could come together, not through fear or dominance, but through understanding and respect. As the ship lifted off from the moon, Lyra stood at the window, looking out at the stars once more. This was just the beginning. There was much more to be done. But in her heart, she knew that anything was possible if people were willing to listen and work together. And perhaps, just perhaps, this small petite alien had something big to offer the universe after all.